Om Shanti. Good evening. Today, let's discuss a bit about consciousness. You only have to Google consciousness to get a sense of what all research is going on in the field of consciousness. A lot is being explored. The reason being the current understanding of the human body, the behavior, thinking, cognitive abilities and capabilities are not explained by the known means of medical sciences. Scientists, especially the neuroscientists, spiritualists, philosophers, and scholars are intensely exploring the phenomena of consciousness. Today, let's discuss about consciousness, and during the course of it, we will arrive at the definition of consciousness as well as what kind of consciousness we have to foster or harbor so that we are always benefited in life. A lot of mystery exists in the field of consciousness as to the questions like why we behave the way we behave, why we do the way we do things, what is the source of energy behind this. There is a tremendous interest in understanding how the consciousness arises, how are thoughts created, how do we create thoughts, and then which entity in the body is responsible for creation of thoughts, experiences, or this consciousness. So the scientists, especially the neuroscientists, have been conducting experiments after experiments. Research is going on in that direction. On the other hand, philosophers, scholars, spiritualists are also exploring this field to understand and get to the bottom of it. As part of understanding consciousness, we will also understand the world at large and then make our way towards the definition of consciousness. Now, just have a look at the world around you. You are likely to see all the materials that are most of the non-living things or insentient things. So let us explore the properties of all these non-living things first. First of all, why are they non-living? Why are they called so? And why is it that there is no consciousness or thoughts in them? Why they don't have any experiential capabilities? Now, we will turn our attention to nature and then say that's the way the nature is, that's the way their properties are, that's the way their attributes are, characteristics are. But another important thing that we have to analyze is that when we break them into pieces, as we go on breaking them, the constituent particles which it is made of, namely the atoms and molecules, they are inherently, innately insentient particles. That is the reason all the materials that these atoms and molecules are made of are insentient. That means they don't have any consciousness, they don't have any thought-making abilities, they can't think, and they don't have any capability to experience. So because the basic matter like electrons, protons, neutrons, atoms and molecules, ions, because these don't have consciousness, because these don't have the thinking ability, whatever these particles make up, all the objects that we see around us, they are all made of these atoms and molecules which are inherently insentient. Because these basic particles do not have the capability to or do not have consciousness, the objects that they constitute also will not have that ability, right? Now, What about the living beings like animals, birds, and we human beings? We will take the cells of our bodies, and if we dissect them, if we see the constituents of them, if we go through the constituents of them, the atoms and molecules are also the constituents of cells and tissues. So, which means that even cells and tissues are non-living things. They are also insentient. Because atoms and molecules don't have thinking ability, even these cells and tissues, they also don't have thinking or consciousness abilities. What it means is that the basic particles like electrons, protons, neutrons, atoms, molecules or ions, which build these insentient matter or insentient materials, also build these cells and tissues. If you observe closely the cells and tissues, it is nothing but a bundle of atoms and molecules. All these basic materials like atoms, molecules, etc., they are very clearly they clearly make up these cells. The cells are made of these things, which means that even the cells are not sentient. Even the cells are not living. Cells are also as insentient or as non-living as any other materials which we just discussed, like computers, glass, mobiles, etc. Further, when we closely observe the constituents of cells and tissues, we can see that all these basic particles are under the influence of some external force. These basic particles are very closely moving and then doing various activities in the cells and tissues, and it appears that they are very much under the influence of some kind of external force. They on their own will not be able to do such kind of activities. It's like all the planets are under the influence of gravitational force. In the same way, it appears that these basic particles are under the influence of some force with which they are closely working. So which means the body, the entire body from head to toe, from brain to skin, and all the parts inclusive, all the organs inclusive, are made of ultimately atoms and molecules. We are taught that these are made of cells and tissues, but even cells and tissues are made of ultimately atoms and molecules. Since the atoms and molecules don't have the thought-making ability, thinking ability or consciousness, even these cells or tissues or the organs that make up this body will not have that kind of ability. Even these organs or cells and tissues will not have thoughts or consciousness. So they are also as much insentient or as much non-living as any other objects which we discussed so far. So it means that there is something else other than this body which is responsible for consciousness. Also, we have to keep in mind that there is some kind of force acting. We will also find out what this force is. So, the brain, which also contains nerve cells or neurons, they also will not have the thinking ability, because they are fundamentally made of basic particles like atoms or molecules, electrons, protons or neutrons. So the ones which are made of atoms and molecules by nature will not have this kind of ability. So this diagram, which depicts the part of the nature, it shows that at the bottom of the pyramid we have got basic matter like electrons, protons, atoms, molecules and physical energies like heat, electricity, and many other things. they get converted to earth, water, air, fire, or ether because they are of the same substances, made of same substances. These basic matter can either be materials or they can be cells and tissues which make up the plants kingdom, and they can be cells and tissues of all the bodies of animals, birds, insects, or other creatures, or they can be cells and tissues of the bodies of human beings. So consciousness is not an aspect of insentient. Now we will move to the next point, and that is, whenever we talk of consciousness, it is always related with the brain, and it has been verified that all the signals to the body for all the activities have their roots in the brain. Also, with various with various evidences that we have, it appears that thinking, consciousness are also evolving from brain. So on the one hand, all the commands to the body, the rest of the body, are coming from the brain. The signals are coming from the brain. And on the other hand, things like thinking, consciousness, experiences are also related with brain. Now we will understand brain a bit. To summarize what brain does, the brain has got around 86 billion neurons, 86 billion nerve cells, tremendous amount of neurons. They make one neuron can receive information from up to 2 lakh neurons, and then this neuron can transmit information to up to 10,000 neurons. So you can imagine they all can make up to trillions of connections. It's very, very huge and then almost incomprehensible. And then they are all arranged in three-dimensional spaces. Here we will try to understand how neurons work. So there is a neuron here, there is a neuron here, and it is made of a cell which is like any other cell in the body, but it has got some extra features. It has got dendrites, it has got axon terminal, and as discussed earlier, this can get information from up to 2 lakh neurons, and it can further transmit information up to 10,000 neurons. What does it mean? What does it mean when we say it gets information from and transmits information to other neurons? All it means is that, from the preceding neurons, it will receive basic particles like ions or some other ions and other molecules. And when they build up in the dendrite region here, and then when it crosses the threshold, then it what is known as action potential traverses across the axon. So this potential, it's also called membrane potential. It is due to the electrochemical activity in the axon. This measures around 80 millivolts. And that much of voltage traverses across the axon, and then at the synaptic junctions it will it will cause neurons to fire. That is, the ions or molecules from this one will jump to the next neuron. So what it means is, it's all an interconnection of neurons, which in turn are made of only atoms and molecules, ions or other basic particles. So when we know that the basic particles cannot have thoughts or consciousness, in whatever complexity they may interact with each other, that does not have any ability to again produce thoughts or consciousness. A basic material by nature which doesn't have thoughts or consciousness cannot by any permutation or combination made to produce thoughts or consciousness. If it were possible, it would have been possible to do such a thing in a laboratory. The fact that it is not possible itself shows up in this brain activity. Though we can say that so many particles will be jumping from one neuron to another, making tremendous amount of neural networks, brain wiring. The fact is, the basic materials that are inherently insentient, that are inherently non-living, innately non-living, cannot by reaction, by interaction, by their interworking, cannot produce thoughts and consciousness, because that is not the basic property of the basic particles. So this debate has always been there, whether neuronal firing produces thoughts or thoughts produces neuronal firing. Which is first? Neuroscientists essentially believe that thoughts are purely an effect of firing neurons. Somehow consciousness is created by brain activity and mind is a product of brain. But we discussed just now that the brain, which is made of neurons, which in turn are made of atoms and molecules, are inherently, innately insentient or non-living things. They cannot have the thought-making ability, or they cannot have consciousness. So what the brain, which is a bundle of atoms and molecules, cannot produce thoughts or consciousness. It is based on interpretations of observations, but not proven. Thought has always been only a direct experience. Thought as such has not been measured or found on any instrument. It has not been measured directly as the current or voltage, as an ammeter or a voltmeter measures current or voltage. And then there has been lot of advancements in brain mapping, but that doesn't establish mind in the brain. Whenever the stalwarts of the neuroscience or neuroscientists talk about the brain mapping, they use the words like, when you think like this, when you make a thought. Actually, what are they referring to? Are they referring to the brain to create thoughts, or are they referring to some person to create thoughts? Now we will visit one of the interesting topics related to brain. Is there any intelligence entity in the brain? That's what we will discuss now. Whenever an analysis of the brain is made, or when the brain is being explained, it is always compared to a microprocessor or a computer. What does a microprocessor does? How does the microprocessor function? For the microprocessor will be fed with a set of inputs. For every combination and permutations of inputs, for the set of input patterns, an output is given by the microprocessor. The microprocessor is programmed to give such an output. Now we will come to the brain. The brain will keep getting inputs continuously through the eyes, through ears, nose, mouth, tongue, the skin, and then these inputs will keep coming to the brain. Now, is there any microprocessor like entity sitting in the brain who will decipher all these things and then program the output, or outputs the response? Please think over. This is very deep, because if you say the brain has got all these things, brain has got all the such program, then it means everything has been programmed from birth to death in the brain. Is such a thing possible? But there is no evidence like that in our findings so far, and nor such a thing would be possible in future. The reason being, we don't know what kind of inputs we will encounter. If we ourselves are the brains, or if brain had produced consciousness, and then if indeed such a programming had taken place, I would have known what I would be encountering in future. So now the brain contains many regions like cortex, cerebellum, medulla, hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, thalamus, cerebrum, and then many other things which like neuroscientists will be able to tell. And with each region having its own specific function to do. But which of the part of the brain resembles that of a microprocessor? The cortex is related to planning, reasoning, like higher thinking, etc. But there is no part in the brain or region in the brain who will analyze all the different inputs, integrates, and prepares a response. It is very simple, because such a thing, if at all has to happen, it should have been happening at the birth itself. The birth should have a clear programming of the lifelong responses, assuming that all the inputs are known. But we know for sure that such a thing is never possible, because inputs keep changing. By the way we come and then like sit and then do something, we are subjected to so many unpredictable inputs, that it is impossible to have a response programmed in the brain for all the conditions. One or two things often being told regarding this is that like when I see a dog I will suddenly run. When I touch a hot object, suddenly I will pull my hand back, because the nerves will act on impulse, something like that, which is being told. But we should understand that survival instinct is not the only aspect of the brain. Survival instinct is only one of the smaller aspect of brain. Brain does so many things. We see even animals living together very peacefully with a lot of love. We see the like a dog, a ferocious dog, happily playing with ducklings or cats. How did that thing come into picture? How did that happen? We can say there is an absence of intelligence entity. There is no evidence of the presence of any intelligence entity in brain that integrates different functions and organizes responses. And there is no possibility of such intelligence entity, because it is impossible to know all stimuli to sense organs and manage responses of the future. Now we will discuss one of the most interesting aspects of brain as found out by a father of neurosurgery. Dr. Wilder Penfield wrote a book, A Mystery of the Mind, a critical study of consciousness and the human brain. Look at the title, like he was born in 1890s. From 1930s to 1960s, he performed many brain surgeries. During this period, he noted down all his findings and then wrote in this book, and then which was released somewhere in 1972. It has got very interesting accounts. In this book, he writes many things about the brain. He says that brain structure is in such a way that it cannot do any new thing, new activity. It is not made, the brain structure, the brain structure will never explain how a person does a new activity. It is best designed, and it can explain only the same thing to be done repeatedly. The same activity done repeatedly. That's what the brain is related with. And then he considers how a child is born, and then how the curiosity develops in the child, what makes the child develop that curiosity, and then the aspects like love, peace, and happiness, how that develops in a human being, and how they are attracted by these things. Many things he writes in his book, and in the end he comes to the conclusion that it is impossible that brain on its own can account for the human experiences or human thoughts or consciousness. He says that there is a separate entity called mind, what we call as mind, and that mind has got an energy of its own, and that mind will make use of the brain for thinking, consciousness, experiences, etc. Brain is separate, and then there is some other entity which is making use of the brain. Brain is an executive of mind, he says, and only this can explain all the findings about the brain. Brain on its own cannot explain. He considers many things in that, very interestingly. Like for example, brain is this much big. He gives stimulus to some part of the brain. If brain is one integrated eye, so to say, and then if there is any conflict in the way one part of the brain has to do with another part of the brain, even that was considered during his surgery. And then he comes to the conclusion that the brain structure, the functioning cannot explain whatever we know of the human activity. Now, we will go through several experiments that he conducted and then recorded in this book. During his tenure, this doctor conducted 700 epileptic surgeries. What they do is, they will open up the skull here by giving local anesthesia, and the patient is alert, he is conscious, and during that time they will conduct surgeries in the brain. Now he injected current electrode stimulation into the brain, as a result of which the hand went up like this. Hand went up, twitched. And the doctor asked the patient, "You are moving your hand." The patient says, "I didn't do it, you did it." Just imagine, the patient is blindfolded. He is blindfolded and then he is lying on the operation theatre. How did he know that the doctor was responsible for his hand movement? He says, the patient says, "I didn't do it, you did it." Now just think over. If brain indeed was the person, if brain indeed was the I, quote, I that person, then the answer would have been totally different. The brain would have told, "Why you are forcing me to do it? I am being forced to do this. You forced me to lift the hand." But what the person told is, "I didn't do it, you did it." So who was telling this? Was it brain or something else? Similarly, he gave electrode stimulation at some other area, as a result of which the patient started speaking something, blabbering something. And then the doctor asks, "You are making that sound?" The patient says, again mark the words, "I didn't make that sound, you pulled it out of me. I didn't make that sound, you pulled it out of me." So the patient was very clear that a doctor is doing this and he is not doing it. If brain was the one which was everything, if the brain was the one which was alone accounting for consciousness or experiences, this wouldn't have been the case. Just give a minute to think over these two aspects and internalize yourself as to what you will be feeling if you were given like this. And then, who is doing this one? The brain or somebody else? Now, Dr. Penfield's experiments further. He says there is no valid evidence that electrode stimulation can activate the mind. None of the actions that we attribute to the mind has been initiated by electrode stimulation. There is no place in the cerebral cortex where electrical stimulation will cause a patient to believe or to decide. Mark the words of the doctor. Such a beautiful lines he writes. This will show how deeply he would have thought about all these things. Dr. Penfield started his career and then he was a staunch materialist. He never believed in like any metaphysical entity. He always felt that brain alone accounts for everything. And then during his tenure as a neurosurgeon, he finds so many things that would have perplexed him, and then these are the findings. If somebody asks for any evidence like soul, then this should be the right proof. It doesn't end there. The doctor mentions in the end what a thrill it is then to discover that the scientist too can legitimately believe in the existence of the spirit. Dr. Penfield's book, his experiments here, gave me a lot of happiness when I was reading it, mainly because when I was young and then I was initiated into this path of meditation, we were always asked to think about ourselves as soul and then residing somewhere here. And I used to always feel that the brain surgeons or the neurosurgeons who conduct surgery would have encountered some unique experiences, would have come across some unique experiences, and then it would have been there in some books recorded. And then when I read this book, I was very, very happy reading it. Now we will go through several unexplained phenomena. There is what is called as a random number generator, which keeps outputting random numbers. Please note that this is not a program. It is based on several basic particles coming out of a integrated circuit. Based on that, some random numbers are churned out, and it was such random number generators are placed at different places in the world. They always generate random numbers, but during global events like 9/11 or some other such incidents, like there has been found to be some predictable patterns in the generated numbers. And then there is this Emoto crystal experiments, wherein he conducted several experiments on water. Upon making good thoughts, the water turned into some very good crystals, pleasing crystals. But upon making bad thoughts, unwanted thoughts, then negative thoughts, the water gave a ghost-like pattern. And then there are double-blind experiments wherein upon making very good thoughts, plant grows very healthily, otherwise it will not. And then there are those what are called as out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, past life memories. People in the present birth will explain their past life incidents which have been found to be true upon investigation. People with very high IQs had little or no brain, small or no brain. So these are all some interesting things that happens with a human being. Regarding out-of-body experience and the near-death experiences, there are many books written on that. Plenty of practical life incidences recorded everywhere in YouTube and internet. You can go through them. But one thing I would like to tell is there are very clear incidences wherein the person who is undergoing the surgery on the operation table will go out of the body, stand somewhere near the roof, and then explains everything, what is going on his body, how the doctors are conducting the surgery, and also the person will be able to explain events that were happening elsewhere. How is that a person who is under anesthesia on the operation theatre tells something which is happening elsewhere? Though there are very good evidences of all these things, many scientists will not even accept them. Many scientists won't even accept them. But one thing that has been very well documented is that thinking and attitude accelerates the healing of diseases. Persons, like having, disease or medical condition, if their thoughts are positive and they have got a positive outlook of their life, it is seen that thinking and attitude accelerates healing of diseases. And equally, negative thinking, negative attitude, negative mindset has resulted in several medical conditions. There are many mysteries. The current understanding through medical sciences cannot explain the following. What is consciousness and its source? What is a thought, and then how does it arise? coordination of activities in the brain, how sleep and anesthesia works, how and where memory is stored in the brain, what is sleep, pain and pleasure. There are many mysteries. We will now discuss about one of the most astonishing event that has happened in the history. It is still not yet printed in the textbooks, and that is quantum mystery. We will find out what is the relation between quantum and consciousness, and then how there are some very interesting evidence as to how consciousness affects matter. The story goes like this. Way back in 1700, Sir Isaac Newton suggested that light is made of particles. Now, come 1800, and a British scientist, Thomas Young, conducted what is called as the famous double slit experiment, with which he proved that light is a wave and not a particle. So what happened? So basically, he took a metal piece, then etched two slits in that. They are very close by slits, but in the film, in this picture, for clarity, it has been shown very wide apart, but they are only microns apart. And through that, a light was passed from the light source. Now, light source at that time was nothing other than sunlight. So this was in 1800. Like when the light was passed through the slit, the expectation was that two bands of light will be formed. The reason being, the light is something like a particle. It will go in straight lines. So one through first slit will form one band, and then another through second slit will form another band. But surprisingly, what was observed was an interference pattern which is typical of a waves actually. So when two waves interfere with each other, a series of crests and troughs are formed. The similar thing had formed on the screen, which is nothing but an interference pattern. So the view that was held for 100 years was changed. It was established that light is a waveform. Now, interesting thing happened. In 1900, around 1900, Albert Einstein proposed photoelectric effect, and for which he got a Nobel Prize. And then for that, the light was again had to be particle. So it was proposed that light has got dual nature. It can either behave as wave or it can behave as particle. And then since 1900, that is what has been in our textbooks. But what happens, somewhere in 1920, the scientists wanted to study the behavior of light as it is passing through the slit. With the advancement of the technology, they placed detectors in between the slit and the screen. Just think over that light has already passed through the screen, and then they place there to study the behavior. The moment they place the detector, some magic happens. Unexpected happens. They will start seeing the expected two bands of light, which is the typical of a particle pattern. Like, whether they place the detector before the double slit or after the double slit doesn't make any difference. So it was verified that, why was it behaving so? And all the scientists at that time, namely Max Planck, David Bohm, Niels Bohr, von Neumann, and many others, everyone are of the opinion now that consciousness is coming into play. When there is an interest to observe what is happening or to monitor what is happening, at that time particle pattern is seen. But when there is no attention towards that experiment, wave pattern is seen. So this has remained a quantum mystery till date, which has not been resolved yet. Various scientists have tried to prove that there is no consciousness effect, but many of the observations as seen during this experiment have not been explained properly. There are many variants of experiment. The detectors were connected to the magnetic tape to record the events. From the detector, it is going to a magnetic head, which will write onto the magnetic tape. Then that is working. But when you remove the magnetic tape, there is no monitoring, and then during that time wave pattern is seen, and then when you put the magnetic tape back, the particle pattern is seen. There are plenty of videos and then materials available in internet and YouTube. You may go through, and there are other variants of the experiment conducted wherein a crystal was kept in the path of the light outside after the double slit. Due to that, what happens is light will be split into two. One will fall on the screen, the other one will be detected. When the detectors were used to detect the light, the behavior of light, again particle pattern was seen. When the light was incident on the three reflectors which reflected and then among themselves, and then both the beams were incident on the detectors, so that you will not understand how the light behaves, because both the detectors have both the lights falling on them. You will not have any way of knowing it. Then interference pattern is seen. So this is the quantum mystery that has remained a mystery all these years and decades. Between 2012 to 2014, another interesting double slit experiment was conducted by Dean Radin. It is there in the YouTube, one can refer to it, where the double slit setup was placed in a closed chamber. It was something like this. There is a laser light. After the filter, it is passing through the two double slit as shown here, and then afterwards it is falling on the camera, CCD line camera. Now, Buddhist monks specifically were identified from all over the world. They participated in this experiment. The experiment was conducted in California. These people were selected from all over the globe. They have to log in, and for the first 5 minutes, they have to think that they are not interested in this experiment. And for the next 5 minutes, they have to think in their minds that light is passing through the double slit. So, like it was, in short, the observation was astounding. For the first 5 minutes, the laser behaved as a wave pattern, and then for the next 5 minutes, they behaved as a particle pattern. So, this quantum mystery remains till date. So, in summary, what the observation is summarized here. All quanta. See, now you may wonder, what has light to do with all these things? Now, all quanta, it was found that not just the light, even with all the basic particles like electrons, protons, atoms, molecules, and ions, with all the particles, the behavior was the same. That is, all quanta, electrons, protons, atoms, molecules, and ions, they behave as waves when not observed. But when there is any means of observing them, when you try to observe, they collapse into or behave as particles. The question is, why should observation matter at all? Now we can infer that basic matter will be in some random state. Basic matter will be in some random state, oscillating unpredictably in space when not observed. Consciousness is responsible for activities, behavior, movements of all atoms, electrons, ions, and molecules. Observation or attention brings predictability, and the basic particles get organized. Consciousness influences matter irrespective of distance. The effects are significant and long-lasting. This is what we can infer from all the set of experiments. Here is a book by a top-notch scientist, Erwin Schrödinger, who wrote What is Life? The Physical Aspect of the Living Cell with the Mind and Matter, Autobiographical Sketches. Very interesting book. I would just like to reproduce here some 3 paragraphs from that book. What he writes, very interesting. My body functions as a pure mechanism according to the laws of nature. That is one sentence. The second statement is, yet I know by incontrovertible direct experience that I am directing its motions, of which I foresee the effects, that may be fateful and all important, in which case I feel and take full responsibility for them. In the end, he writes, the only possible inference from these two facts is, I think, that I in the widest meaning of the word, that is to say, every conscious mind that has ever said or felt I am the person, if any, who controls the motion of the atoms according to the laws of nature. Very interesting. Now you can see the predicament of the scientist when he writes the third paragraph. He keeps saying I in the widest meaning of the word, that is to say, every conscious mind that has ever said or felt I. When he is telling that, you can see his predicament, that what he is trying to understand, who is that I? Erwin Schrödinger as a scientist, Erwin Schrödinger as a body, Erwin Schrödinger as somebody else. It's a very interesting, predicament the great scientist goes through, which he has beautifully expressed in his book. So when we consider all these evidences, scientific evidences and empirical evidences, the first one is the entire body, including this brain, is composed of only atoms and molecules, which is insentient. Further, that the cells in the body and the neuronal cells in the brain, they appear to be acting according to some influence of some external force. And the third one, the brain compared to a microprocessor, so there cannot be any intelligence entity in the brain. And the fourth one, an extraordinary finding by Dr. Wilder Penfield, where during the surgery he finds somebody else other than brain talking, maybe using the brain, but somebody other than brain is talking. And the final one is this quantum experiment, which very clearly establishes the fact that consciousness is affecting the matter, the behavior of the matter. So with all these things, we are now left with no doubt that we have to accept inevitable presence of someone who is other than brain, who is responsible for the consciousness. Consciousness is an attribute or an aspect of this metaphysical entity, but not of the brain or the body. Because one may take shelter in the complexity of the brain and then try to explain that today or tomorrow or day after tomorrow we will be able to find it out, but how long it will take, when fundamentally we know that these are insentient matter without any ability to have consciousness or thinking power or thinking ability. Then there is no point in thinking that this will happen. There is no point in thinking that one day we will find how these exhibit thoughts and consciousness. So we have to accept the inevitability of existence of a metaphysical entity having consciousness. Materialistic perspective of the brain cannot create our experiences. We have to contemplate and embrace the possibility of an immaterial, metaphysical entity with consciousness that operates the brain. Exploring the immaterial and spiritual entity is as scientific and logical as any other form of inquiry. We should not be bounded by the premise that only that which is visible, only that which can be felt physically alone can be open for scientific exploration. No. Exploring the immaterial and spiritual entity is also as scientific and logical as any other form of inquiry. The important thing is finding out the truth. What the truth is very important. Metaphysical cannot always be understood from physical viewpoint. See, When things are physical, we can have physical evidences, but when it is into the metaphysical domain, it is not possible to give evidences by physical experiments. And consciousness can be understood only through consciousness, which is the direct personal experience. The importance of direct personal experience cannot be discounted. Take, for example, the thought. Everyone thinks, everyone makes thoughts, everyone creates thoughts, everyone is a creator of his or her own thoughts. Now, this should never be underestimated. This should never be underestimated, because it is because of thought that the world is moving. Now, with all these things, it is inevitable that we have to accept the presence of somebody else who is operating the brain, and this someone else, has got the consciousness, has got thinking ability, and this someone else is the one who is actually experiencing. So now we have a practical interaction where the metaphysical or spiritual interacts with physical matter, and the interaction and then physiological. So who was the observer? When we say there was an observer who was affecting the behavior of the particles, who was that observer? Now we will introduce the immaterial spiritual entity, the soul. Soul is a point of light, a minute point sitting in the brain as shown in this picture. He is a point of light. Soul is the one who is sitting in between two eyebrows here and little bit inside, and then operating the body through the brain. Soul was the observer. So whenever we say you or I or he or him or her, the reference is to the soul. So the person is none other than the soul. This is me, this is I, the soul. This is me, and this is I, the soul. Which is the seat of consciousness? Which is the seat of all the thoughts? Soul. Soul is the source, and then soul is the seat of consciousness and thoughts. I create my thoughts here. I see, hear, breathe, talk, and do all activities from this place. I, the soul, am the doer. I simultaneously keep doing something no other material can do. There is a soul in each body, and the soul is the owner. The soul is the one who will create thoughts. The soul is the one who will make decisions. The soul is the one who will perform karma through the body, perform various activities through the body, and whatever actions that have been done get imprinted in the soul as latent tendencies. They form the impressions in the soul. Now the soul creating thoughts or the soul generating thoughts, sometimes we create thoughts, sometimes thoughts appear in us due to our past actions for some relation. So the ability of the soul to create thoughts is called mind. Thinking is a power of the soul, but this aspect is called mind. The ability of the soul to make decisions is called intellect. So the soul is the one who is the doer. Everything is happening in this tiny point of light, the soul. So now we will arrive at the definition of consciousness. The picture that is being shown is the soul, magnified diagram, magnified picture. In the soul, continuously the thoughts which are shown in the form of waves, and then decision making in the form of the balance, and the impressions, concentric circles, they are depicted. So all these are simultaneously happening. All these things are happening simultaneously and concurrently in the soul. That means I, the soul, am continuously thinking, uh, continuously thinking, taking decisions, and then like developing my own impressions, latent tendencies. That is based on the way I think, I decide, I make decisions, and then I perform actions through the body, and then that's the way I create my latent tendencies. Now, what is consciousness? Consciousness is the ability of the soul to think, decide, and form habits. Consciousness is the ability of the soul to think, decide, and form habits. It includes our feelings, experiences, emotions, outlook, mindset, and so on. So, in short, consciousness is the sum total of all that is happening in the soul. Consciousness is sum of all that is happening in the soul. Consciousness, everything is happening in soul, be it latencies, traits, perception, comprehension, leadership, intuition, concentration, sentience, memory, reasoning, everything is going on in the soul, and it is not in the body or in the brain. So please take a minute or two to go through all these things, and then we have to understand and accept that the way we use the language correctly goes a long way in understanding myself as soul correctly. It is correct to say I am a soul, my soul is incorrect. Soul is not mine, I myself am a soul. And then usually the tendency, by the habit or tendency, we start referring to soul as by it, by the word it. Soul is the one who is responsible for life. So soul has to be addressed as he or him. And by continuously addressing the soul as he or him, we will understand the self, the soul, better and accurately. Soul himself is not the consciousness. Consciousness is not another name for the soul. Soul is having consciousness. So all that is happening in the soul is consciousness. So soul and consciousness should not be used interchangeably, casually. So by using the term repeatedly, that I, the soul, am having consciousness, then it will make much more clear, and then there will be clarity in the self as the soul. And it is important that I have to say I have energy, rather than saying the soul himself is the energy or I am the energy. So sometimes there will be tendency, what is soul? Soul is energy. No, soul has energy. Soul has energy, that means I have energy. Whenever I say I means I, the soul. It is not whenever I say I, we use it, but actually, I means I, the soul, seated here. Understand soul as soul. When we say body, we understand body as the body. There is no other term required to describe it. There is no need of any descriptor for the body. We understand body as is. In the same way, it is important that we understand soul as is. Understand soul as a soul. Understand thought as a thought. Understand mind as a mind. The way we have been used to understand body or the face, and so on. Everything is happening in the same world. There is a physical realm on one side, and then simultaneously there is a spiritual realm. Physical bodies, physical particles, energies, heat, electricity, gravitational, microwave energies, vibrations and radiations, they are all the aspects of physical realm. Modeling is possible in a physical world. Physical world, physical particles can be modeled either as a mathematical equation or as a geometric, coordinates in many ways. And to the physical realm, no consciousness is applicable, and there is no consciousness in any of the elements of the physical realm. When the famous equation E is equal to mc squared applies only to the particles or the elements in the physical realm, but it is not applicable to soul. Soul is not a physical object. Soul is totally a metaphysical entity, immaterial entity. To the soul, these equations are not applicable. No physical laws or relationships are applicable to the soul. Thinking, ideas, decision making, what we call as sanskars, habits, latent tendencies, virtues, and powers like peace, purity, spiritual energy like thoughts, determination, willpower. These are all again aspects of spiritual realm. Only direct experience is the consciousness. So what we have got is only the direct experience, and then consciousness is a direct experience. So we have to comprehend and understand entities as are. We cannot describe spiritual realm in terms of physical realm, but we can comprehend physical realm in terms of spiritual realm. But spiritual realm has to be understood as spiritual. So far, we studied about the physical realm and then the spiritual realm, soul, body, and the important point is both soul as well as all these basic particles, they have been since eternity, and then they will continue to be eternal. They are neither created nor are destroyed. They are always there. Whereas the basic particles like atoms, etc., they change from one substance to another. They change forms and shape. Soul will only undergo a transformation in his characteristics, in his virtues. Now we will understand how the soul is seated in the brain or in the body, and how the interaction between soul and brain takes place. Brain may be a highly complicated organ, but it is after all a passive one. Fundamental characteristic of a soul is to express himself. Soul always wants to express himself, and that's why he takes a body. He enters into the body. We can say brain is made out in such a way that a transfer of expressions takes place from the soul to the body. And brain is also made in such a way that translation of inputs from the body occurs in a way soul can comprehend. I, the soul, feel very happy inside. Here, I feel happy. That happiness is transferred as a smile on the face through so many neuromuscular activities. And whatever I see, hear, breathe, smell, and taste, and then the touch will get translated in a way I, the soul, can comprehend. The soul is surrounded by innumerable basic particles that make up the brain. As we had discussed earlier, brain contains billions of neurons, but each neuron is again made of atoms and molecules. So we can say the soul is subtly connected to all basic particles of the brain. So what can be the analogy? How to bring that analogy? As per the consciousness of the soul, all these basic particles like electrons, protons, neutrons, atoms, ions, molecules align themselves in accordance with the consciousness of the soul. The analogy is similar to a magnet and its magnetic field. We all are well aware of the way we experimented with magnet and its field with iron filings when we through the iron filings in the magnetic field, they all beautifully align. They all get beautifully aligned around the magnet. In the same way, as per the consciousness of the soul, all these basic particles get aligned around the soul. How a soul interacts with the brain. As the soul keeps thinking, as per the consciousness of the soul, the particles around the soul will keep aligning with respect to that spiritual field. And the consciousness in the soul will keep influencing the particles of the brain. And converse is also true, that the alignment of particles in the brain influences the soul. So I, the soul, influence the particles in the brain, as well as the particles in the brain influences me. I get influenced by the particles of the brain. How is the input formed? In the brain, the soul is surrounded by billions of nerve cells or neurons and tissues. Ions and molecules continuously keep jumping between neurons that make trillions of connections between neurons. Each neuron constitutes countless atoms, molecules, and ions. The consciousness of the soul, his intentions and desires, determines the connectivity between neurons. The consciousness of the soul thus creates certain pattern in the brain. This in turn results in the movements of various organs of the body, including expressions on the face through neuromuscular activity. The patterns of particles are formed due to inputs from sensory organs, namely eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin. The soul comprehends the information from such patterns. See, it's a continuous process. Consciousness in the soul keeps establishing related patterns in the brain. At a later time, the soul comprehends the same pattern and makes interpretations. It's a feedback, it's a loop back. The time lapse could be in seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, years, or decades, or even more. This explains the dreams, habits, neuroplasticity, OCD, wiring, behaviors, etc. This also explains how a sustained change in consciousness improves the mental health of the person. Some patterns in the brain may change instantly with consciousness. Other patterns may continue to persist even if the soul changes his consciousness. There is a kind of inertia in the brain. The pattern may change after repeated reinforcement of the thoughts. In other words, power or intensity of thoughts and decision or willpower influence neural paths. What is sleep? Like, we have to understand the characteristics of the soul again here. A soul has some unique characteristics or abilities. One of the gifted trait of a soul is his ability to become bodiless even as he is in the body. Even while the soul is in the body, being there, he can withdraw from the feelings of the body and he can get detached. Soul has also got a wonderful capacity to remember and forget. Sleep is a state during which a soul withdraws from the feelings of the body, gets detached and become bodiless. He will be in a state of rest. And then what is anesthesia? Anesthesia is induced detachment of soul from the body. The soul will be in a state of rest. The same is the case with vegetative state or coma. This is a great analogy. Soul is the driver and body is like the car, but the brain is like an engine. So we have to treat depending on whoever has gone bad. If the brain has gone bad, then brain has to be treated. If the soul has gone bad, soul has to be treated. If both are bad, both have to be treated. And then both are good, that's a great condition. But we know very well that there has always been a degradation. Brain may be good, but the soul is bad. And soul is not always good either. So, negative tendencies like jealousies, like revengeful attitude, ego, greed, lust, anger, attachment, these all vices have made soul, like a bit bad, and then the soul has to be treated with something better. Human body, it is an amazing machine with wonderful organs and unparalleled complexity. Of them all, brain perhaps is the most mysterious. Its uniqueness is favorable for the soul to interface. Now think of enormous capability of the soul. Soul is made in such a way that the soul can operate at will. A synonym for soul is life. Soul's consciousness keeps the cells functioning. Cells carry molecules to different places. Healing of diseases due to positive consciousness is reshuffling of atoms and molecules in the body. When the soul leaves, everything disintegrates. So we don't need any proof of consciousness. The fact of our existence, that we are alive, we are sentient, we think, we make decisions, we create habits, we learn, remember, forget, concentrate, perceive, have our own intuition, morality and ethics. This by itself is a proof of consciousness. As we discussed earlier, the proof of consciousness cannot be by physical means, material means. In fact, the point to be asked is how this is not a proof of consciousness. If this is not a proof enough, then what is? Do you want some machine to be brought and then say this is what is required? It is like, this is from the book 1 Week Course. Please take 2 minutes time to read this. Respected Jagdish Chandra Bhaiji, the erstwhile chief spokesperson of the Brahma Kumaris, had written long ago in his book, The 1 Week Course. The brain is the control room of the soul. The soul employs the brain to control the movements of the body, and it employs as it wishes any one or more parts of it. Brain is the machine by means of which the soul thinks, remembers, receives messages from or gives directions to the sense organs. The brain is the meeting place of all nerves, which carry sensations from all parts of the body to brain, which functions like a control room and makes the body work. It is in the brain that the soul, through the nerves, puts the body to work and experiences physical sensations, pleasure and pain, or happiness and sorrow. But the brain is separate from the soul. Brain is a complex thing made of matter, whereas the soul has the life principle or consciousness. This is the organization of the nature. Soul's consciousness is acting everywhere. The basic matter like electrons, protons, atoms, molecules, and physical energies like heat and electricity, they in turn can change into, can assume different forms like earth, water, air, fire, or ether. These basic particles can be either materials, can manifest as materials. They can be the cells and tissues of plants kingdom. They can be the cells and tissues of animal kingdom, animals, birds, insects and other creatures' bodies. Or they could be the cells and tissues of bodies of human beings. Now, souls interact with the bodies. Souls interact with the bodies. So, in other words, souls directly interact with the physical particles, basic physical particles. One can say, I will think I will change my consciousness, I will change my thoughts, and then I will change the way the atoms and molecules align in the body, and then I will cure all my diseases. But it is not always possible. We should understand that the law of karma is always acting. My past consciousness decided the past and present. My present consciousness will decide present and future. Harboring, developing, and sustaining right consciousness is fundamental to what we get and experience. When we say me or mine, it is I, the soul. In literature, you will find many theses, many proposals, many suggestions that soul could be located near hypothalamus or near a pineal gland. More than where the soul is seated, it is how the soul is functioning through the brain. What is the effect the soul's consciousness has on the brain and its particles? What the influence is of the soul with his consciousness on all the particles of the brain? And for example, I want to move my hand. My thoughts and desires, my intentions will result in particles aligning in some particular way in the brain, and then it is converted to the neuromuscular activities. In the same way, I want to see something which is there on my left, and then I keep making the thought that I should see there, and then it results in the eyes moving that side or the eyeballs moving that side. So the important factor is how soul results in movement of all the particles in the brain, and through that the movement of these various organs of the body. Our experience tells that somewhere we are seated, we the souls are seated somewhere behind this point, the center of the eyebrows, and somewhere at this intersection, in this and this intersection. You can feel it. Having learnt about the fact that we are all souls and not these bodies, we are actually a point of light residing here. Now, our consciousness needs to change. Our consciousness needs to change from being body conscious to soul conscious. Soul conscious is the highest form of consciousness, so which we have to harbor and develop in all walks of our life. Soul is the living entity. What is soul? Soul is a soul. Soul is the living entity, a sentient point of light who has he has the ability to think, decide and form latent tendencies, ability to operate and drive his body. Soul is metaphysical, immaterial entity. He has all the virtues in him. I, the soul, hear through the ears. Whatever sound waves will go through the ears and then get terminated in a place in the brain, but it is the soul who in the end will comprehend those sound waves and then make meaning out of it. And I, the soul, am the one who is speaking through the mouth. I, the soul, am the one who is speaking through the mouth. Whatever thoughts in me, the intense desire and thoughts in me, the soul, manifest as sound through the mouth. And I, the soul, am the one who see through the eyes. Actually, I will see through these eyes, and then whatever the object or the ones which I want to see, those images will appear in my visual cortex in the brain, which I, the soul, will comprehend. So here is a picture where how the soul who is sitting behind the eyes is seeing through the eyes. So it's always a soul to soul connection. When two people converse, when two people interact, when two people are talking to each other, it is actually one soul talking with another soul. It is like, one may be seeing the another person's face, but in the end, it is the soul who is making all the sense and then doing this interaction. Ultimately, we are all connected. We are all connected to each other in the world. And why we are all connected? Because all the souls are, there is no limitation of space or time here. All are connected because all are in spiritual realm and then connected to God. So this is the meaning of saying, this is what we say, we are all the souls. All the soul is connected to God. Consider yourself as soul and then remember Supreme Soul. While the physical laws like E is equal to mc squared, Newton's laws of motion, etc. applies for the physical realm, similarly spiritual laws apply to the spiritual realm. So one of them being the law of karma. You will get in return for whatever you do. This is a spiritual law. Another thing is, now we know that the spiritual realm leads the realm of science,